almost 1.9 trillion budget. That is an unprecedented amount for a budget in Kenya.
Kenya's largest budget ever. Just who will pay for it?
Hakuna haja ya kuweka incitement, hakuna haja ya kutusi viongozi wenzako, kwa sababu wananchi hawa hawazi kukula hiyo matusi.
Debating the dialogue, Uhuru takes Jubilee message to Nyanza.
A total of 338 vehicles belonging to these companies have been licensed to operate between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m.
A green light for night travel, why only 7 SACCOs made the cut.
A glimmer of hope. Could this be the end of Turkana-Pokot conflict?
This is KTN Prime with Nancy Kachungira and Wilson Buru.
Well, a very good evening to you and welcome to the most comprehensive bulletin in the country. This is certainly KTN Prime.
Yes, it is. Thank you for joining us at the beginning of a new week. Our sign language interpreter is William Silla. Now, in exactly 3 days, the Treasury will present Kenya's largest budget in history. We're talking about 1.77 trillion shillings. That's the total amount involved.
Well, and that is no doubt a mind-boggling figure, as we shall see in a moment. But that is perhaps where the good news ends, and that is because a good portion of that money might well come from you, the taxpayer.
That's right. So tonight we put the spotlight on the 2014-2015 budget, its facts and the figures involved, and of course, what it means for you.
Now, we will, of course, have a comprehensive look at where all the money will come from, where it will go, and exactly why the government has very tough choices.
Also, in a special edition of Job Centre later on, we'll take a closer look at what the government must do in order to create jobs and finance this budget. That coverage begins now. Now we begin with, of course, a budget like no other, and that is the term that has actually been used to describe Kenya's 1.8 trillion shillings 2014-2015 spending.
It is a reflection of Kenya's current economic predicaments, and it is a reflection, let me take that again, of Kenya's economic predicaments, where key economic sectors like tourism and agriculture are headed south, while the cost of living remains very high.
Here are some excerpts on what Kenyans think of it.
Budget 2014-2015.
Wa review ile budget ya last year ili wananchi wajue kama zile vitu zenye waliweka kwa ile budget ile iliyopita walifanya au wakufanya.
We feel like the government has concentrated more on the businesses that are being taxed already. And there is a wide range of businesses out there that the government should widen the scope and look for other businesses that can be taxed.
Projected expenditure for 2015-2016 is about 1.8 trillion. And 2016-2017, we are going to see expenditure hitting through 2 trillion. What is important for the government is to recognize that while we expand the economy, while we expand with the kind of expenditure we are committing ourselves to infrastructure and other projects, it's important also to raise the revenue.
Now, when the budget estimates are tabled in Parliament this Thursday, the million-dollar question will be, will you cough more money in taxes? Asha Mulu now reports on the possible targets that will fund the country's most ambitious budget yet.
Apart from having to justify why this financial year will have the biggest budget in the country's history, 1.77 trillion shillings, on Thursday, the Finance Cabinet Secretary Henry Rotich will also have to explain to Kenyans where this money is coming from. Already, Kenyans are concerned that, as usual, the taxpayer will bear the biggest burden. And the first group to be smoked out may well be the usual suspects. consumers of cigarette and alcohol in what is often called sin tax.
We saw what happened when the taxation on senator was increased. It led to the growth of illicit alcohol in the market. And in the last 1 month, we saw the negative effect that had. We lost about 100 Kenyan lives to illicit alcohol. So our plea to the government as Kenya Association of Manufacturers is not to target those industries.
While the increase of sin tax may have its downside, many Kenyans are more worried about the basic commodities. Tax experts have warned that the 1.8 trillion shilling budget will most likely force the government to push up the taxes.
Mtu nafanyia kama shilingi kama 500. Ukikuja sukari ni shilingi 100, unga ni shilingi 150. Ukikuja kwa mboga imeongezeka, mafuta imeongezeka. Sasa hakuna kitu unafanyia. Na ile kitu unafanyia kama ni 1000 inakwisha siku moja hivi ukiwa nafanya.
Wanatupandishia ushuru juu na pale tunauza vitu tunauza chini sana.
The leaders concerned not to focus mostly on basic goods, but they can explore more ways of collecting taxes apart from basic commodities.
Maminista wanatembea na magari 4, 5. Wananchi wa chini hata chakula ni shida, ule ugali ni sima chini, pia watu hawezi kuafford. Nchi imeharibika, nchi imekuwa mbaya. Uhuru ndugu yangu nakwambia, habari ya kupandisha ushuru hakuna. Fikiria watu wa chini.
What's left the government in another awkward spot is the Auditor General's report revealing that at least a third of the country's budget goes to waste. Treasury is now on the spot to seal those leakages before taxing Kenyans more than they can handle.
We are not succeeding in widening our tax net. We're going after the same taxpayers over and over and over again, and therefore we've sort of killed the goose that's laying the golden eggs for us.
The government should instead look at expanding the tax base, because there are many people who don't pay taxes in Kenya who should be paying taxes ideally. The government should also look at tax leakages. Where are we having tax leakages in our country? That should be addressed instead of having a sin tax.
With the countdown to budget day now on, the biggest headache for President Uhuru Kenyatta's government will be to rally the country behind its second budget as Kenyans wait anxiously for promises to be delivered. Ashamwilu, KTN, Nairobi.
Well, if we look back at the 2013-2014 budget, there have been a number of hits and misses as the government faces a myriad of challenges. Michael Karanja took a look back at the current fiscal year budget that comes to a close by the end of June.
June 11, 2013, Henry Rotich walks out of Treasury building and repeats a scene that has been played out for a number of decades. Holding the budget briefcase aloft, the cabinet secretary held the dreams of a nation anchored on the manifesto laid out by the Jubilee administration during the campaign period. At 1.64 trillion shillings, the budget focused on 6 priority areas that were the clarion call during the campaign period. These were food security, where 2 billion shillings were set aside for the agribusiness fund to aid farmers expand their production. A further 3.6 billion shillings was devoted to the 1 million acre Galana irrigation program. The excitement over that project had barely kicked off when alarm bells went off over potential food shortage. 6 billion shillings earmarked for the presidential runoff was redirected to the youth and ways of funds. However, the government failed to institute structures that would have seen companies offer internship or employment opportunities to students leaving university. Analysts believe that the government might have bitten off more than it could chew and failed to prioritize what it needed to do first.
Well, I think the government was new at the time. Obviously, I think in terms of rating, we gave them a B. They did very well, being a few months in office after election.
Kenyans, however, give a rather harsh verdict of the government's performance.
These people, they are just politicians who just come on the ground looking for votes, enticing you, but when now you come to reality, they cannot achieve them. In fact, instead, they even eat the money.
53.2 billion shillings was set aside for the much-hyped laptop project for Standard 1 going children. Challenges in procurement coupled with mounting budgetary shortfalls saw the project shelved for another year.
You may have a budget, but if you don't plan better, you will not be able to spend it. And it is a pity that budget earmarked for development goes back to the treasury without being spent.
A shining light in the current budget would have to be the introduction of free maternal care in public hospitals. However, the health sector has been rocked with staff shortages, not to mention failure to invest in new hospitals. The 1.5% railway development levy imposed on all imported goods has also worked wonders for the government, netting 14.4 billion shillings against a 9.9 billion shilling projection. The introduction of the VAT Act last year has, however, been linked to the rising cost of living that has seen inflation rise to 7.3%. Michael Karanja, KTN.
So there we have it. And now let's take a look at a few summaries of the highlights of this budget, this 2014-2015 budget. First of all, it is good to understand what 1.7 trillion shillings looks like in numbers. That's right. You can count the zeros, 9 zeros. That's the kind of budget the government is looking at this year. And of course, like we've told you, this is the biggest budget in Kenya's history. And last year's expenditure was actually 1.6 trillion. So this has gone up significantly. If you compare it with the year before that, the budget was around 1 trillion in terms of expenditure. So obviously with devolution, that number did skyrocket, and now we see ourselves at a budget of 1.7 trillion shillings. Now, moving forward, let's take a look at what we can expect. Well, in terms of recurrent expenditure, now this is just the money that the government uses to run the government. That's right, salaries, wages, meetings, conferences. That's standing at 20.8% of the GDP. Now, that's rather high because the recommended amount is actually 12%, meaning we're 8% over where we should be in terms of how much we are spending. If we look at development expenditure, on the other hand, it's half of what we're spending on running the government. We're only spending 10.2% of our GDP on actual development programs. And this is made even worse by the fact that our absorption rate, which means how much of the money you actually allocate to development is spent for that purpose, our absorption rate as of last year was at 45.8%, which means if the government allocates 100 shillings to development, only 45 of those shillings will actually be spent for that purpose. But let's zero down now on some of the sectors that, of course, are really crucial to economic growth. Food security and agriculture. What is the government planning to spend? Well, they're looking at 9.5 billion for irrigation projects to make sure that people are not just farming for themselves, for subsistence, but they're also farming things that they can sell commercially. And they're going to be spending on strategic grain reserves, fisheries. They're also reviving the Kenya Meat Commission. And now this is an interesting one. 3.5 billion is going to the Galana irrigation project. Now this is very interesting because in the last financial year, 3.6 billion was allocated for the first phase of that very same project. So, of course, the question is, what happened to the 3.6 billion that was allocated in the last financial year? Was it in fact used to make any progress at all with that particular project? Let's move on to education, though. The government is spending about 139 billion shillings on that. And if we compare it with last financial year, that was 273 billion. So there's a significant reduction. But once again, a very interesting point which we'll come to. They're spending on free education, obviously, as they do every year, promoting teachers as well, training institutes. They're also providing sanitary towels for girls in schools. And they're recruiting 5,000 more teachers at 2.3 billion. But if we look at our next slide here, once again, 17.4 billion has been allocated for the notorious laptop project, digital content, computer laboratories. But what's interesting is in the last financial year, 53.2 billion was allocated for the deployment of 1.35 million laptops last year. So again, you have to ask yourself, why are we seeing the same things in this budget as in the last budget, and it doesn't seem like we've made any progress? Let's go to healthcare. 10.5 billion shillings allocated for free primary healthcare. Of course, that includes the maternal healthcare that the government is making progress in. Leasing equipment also for hospitals, an internship program for doctors and nurses. They're spending 4 billion on that maternal health program. 8.4 billion goes to Kenyatta National Hospital. That's actually the biggest spending in terms of the healthcare docket. That will go to Kenyatta National Hospital and that as well. If we move on to transport, 41 billion shillings is going to ongoing road construction, and in terms of new roads, 10 billion shillings. If you're in Nairobi, you might be happy to hear that some money has actually been allocated to decongest road junctions in Nairobi, 1 billion shillings for that. We're also spending 19.4 billion shillings on the standard gauge railway. Let's next talk about security. Definitely a hot issue right now. 6.7 billion shillings is going to be spent on acquiring police vehicles, actually leasing them because that's much cheaper, and aircraft as well for police. 2.9 billion is going to be spent on recruiting 10,000 police and security officers. And this is very good news for the police service. A police medical insurance scheme, 1.6 billion has been allocated for that. Of course, a lot of arguments are raised about the state of security, also depending on people who are underpaid and not very well taken care of. Well, now there's 1.3 billion for police and security officers' houses, and also, as far as the poaching conversation goes, 1.8 has been allocated to that. And this is what we're spending on Amazon, 6.1 billion shillings, which is almost as much as what we're spending on leasing some police vehicles and aircraft. Now, in terms of where is this money coming from and how much do we have? We have a 356.9 billion shilling deficit last year. This year, it's slightly less at 342.3 billion shillings this year. Now, this is the money that the government has to raise somehow outside the budget, most likely from taxes. And if we look at what they did last year to cover the deficit, well, they actually, one of the things they did was impose a 1.5% railway development levy on everything that was imported. And this actually did really, really well for them. They did target raising 10 billion shillings in a year from that tax, but they raised in just 16 months 13 billion shillings. So they might be looking at something similar, perhaps raising that number from 1.5% to 3%. That might be something that will happen. We don't yet know which taxes are going to bring up that deficit, but we can be certain that it will be coming from somewhere. So, Wilson, that's how it stands as far as the budget goes. We can probably brace ourselves for having to make up that.
You know, the most disconcerting thing about is this absorption issue. That every 45 shillings out of 100 shillings that is allocated in the budget does not go.
Actually, it's more like 60 shillings.
It's 50 shillings, 55 shillings does not go to the intended use. So the question being, where does that money go to?
Exactly. And like you've seen, we have so many things in the budget that are there. Again, they're there year after year after year, but we're not necessarily seeing the kind of progress.
Last year we allocated 53 billion shillings to laptop project.
Yes.
This year we're allocating 17 billion shillings. We've still not seen that laptop projects, being initiated.
Well, that is the question. And of course, you can join this conversation using our hashtag borrowingbudget. Let us know what you think.
And the big Q tonight, we are asking, should Kenyans be taxed more to finance? Kenya's biggest budget ever? Should Kenyans be taxed more to finance Kenya's biggest budget yet?
Budget 2014-2015.
Let's move away from the budget to politics now. And President Uhuru Kenyatta continued with his charm offensive in Nyanza today, touring various centers in Kisii and Nyamira counties, regions that overwhelmingly voted for the coalition of reforms and democracy CORD. Uhuru stuck to his guns on the national dialogue debate, chiding CORD for raising political temperatures and distracting the government from implementing its policies. Here's Fred Omula with that report.
Safely outside the ODM stronghold of Luo Nyanza, the president held various public fora across the Gusii region, an area that gave him only 30% of the presidential vote in last year's election, despite the attention he lavished on it. And to deliver his message, he turned to his close allies for the curtain raiser.
Sisi kama viongozi wa kisiasa, tuna tabia ya kutumia watoto wa wananchi vibaya. Tukiwaambia kuwa hata damu ikimwagika ni sawa tu. Lakini watoto wetu, Mheshimiwa Rais, wote tumewaficha ndani ya nyumba wakati tunadanganya watoto wa wananchi watoke nje wafanye kazi.
Wanaturudisha, ati wanasema sasa wanataka tufanye dialogue. Mnataka hivyo ama mnataka maendeleo? Ati tuache hii kazi tunawafanyia kuleta barabara, tuache kazi ya kuleta maendeleo ya pesa za biashara, tukae chini tunywe chai na mandazi na wananchi wanateseka. Hivyo ndio mnataka?
I'm number 3 in command, especially
politically and influence-wise. Na enough is enough. Nawaambia upinzani, dada yangu Janet ako hapa. Being silent is not being foolish.
But it wasn't a field day for Uhuru as nominated Senator Janet Ongera put up a defense for the opposition and why it's pushing the government.
Nataka mjue opposition is very necessary. Ndiyo inaweza kukusaidia ili ujue mahali makosa iko and you'll know whether it's credible on how you are governing. Kwa hivyo msione kama inawasumbua sana ama muogope kuona sisi kama opposition tukisema mahali, we are merely pointing mahali kuna mashida.
After all was said and done, the head of state took the stand and presented his case.
Na uchaguzi umeisha. Let us come together. Tufanye kazi ya development ya wananchi wetu. Hakuna haja ya kuweka incitement, hakuna haja ya kutusi viongozi wenzako, kwa sababu wananchi hawa hawezi kukula hiyo matusi. Lakini ukiamua ya kwamba hiyo ndio barabara ambayo unataka kwenda, hiyo ni mambo yako.
Uhuru toured various centers across Nyamira and Kisii County, including Kenyenya, Keumbu and Keroka, finishing at Kisii School that was marking 80 years since inception. Fred Omulo, KTN, Kisii County.
So the dialogue dilemma continues. Both sides are talking, just not to each other. Moving on now, night travel is set to resume on several routes after the government licensed 7 companies to operate at night after they complied with conditions set out by the government. Now the companies are Modern Coast, MASH, Easy Coach, North Rift, Transline, Eldoret Sacco and Guardian. 338 vehicles belonging to the 7 companies will now operate between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m.
For over 5 months now, some public service vehicle operators have been counting their losses after the government imposed conditions on night travel in a bid to curb road carnage. Now, night travel can resume, at least for 7 companies. Modern Coast, MASH, Easy Coach, North Rift, Transline, Eldoret, Sacco and Guardian have been licensed to operate at night.
A total of 338 vehicles belonging to these companies have been licensed to operate between 9 p.m. and 6 a.m.
The government says the companies have met the required conditions, among them eyesight and general medical tests for drivers, availability of 2 drivers per vehicle at night, introduction of a fleet management system and mutual aid assistance in the event of an accident.
What the government did was to impose conditions that will improve the safety of passengers during night movement. This is because, from our data, the most tragic accidents with high number of fatalities occurred at night.
With no night travel for months, the government says the conditions have paid off, with road accident fatalities recording a decline.
As of 31st May 2014, road traffic fatalities had declined by approximately 20% compared with a similar period last year.
Only 338 vehicles have been licensed to operate at night, and the Transport Cabinet Secretary is warning other companies that have not been certified to operate at night against resuming night travel.
Kama tukikamata usiku na huna license, hata mchana itaenda. So wajihadhari.
Passengers and public service vehicle operators have welcomed the move to license compliant companies.
Kazi ilikuwa imeenda chini, watu wenu huwa tunawabeba na biashara na hawezi enda mchana, lazima waende usiku, wafika asubuhi, wanunue bidhaa zao na warudi. So tumeshukuru sana, tumefurahia.
Customers are very happy and we can now reach our duties effectively and on time.
With most road accidents with high fatalities involving public service vehicles occurring at night, the government hopes the new measures will serve to reduce the number of lives lost on Kenyan roads. Rita Tinina, KTN.
Now, for the very first time, women from the Pokot and Turkana communities sat down to dialogue. Led by their female legislators, the women held their First Place Crusade in West Pokot County in a bid to curb the constant cattle raids in that region. Marcy Kandie reports.
The
They have a reason to dance, led by their female members of parliament. And for the first time, the women from Turkana and Pokot communities sing one tune, sending the message of peace in Makutano area, West Pokot County.
Tunaomba ya kwamba tuungane kwa pamoja ili tuendeleze amani, maana kwa miaka mingi tumeumia kwa sababu ya vita.
The women say during the raids, it's them who feel the pinch of it, losing husbands and sons as a result. What they say has to stop.
Wakati kuna vita, watu wanaoumia ni wamama na watoto. Na sisi kama wamama waimbaji kutoka Turkana County, kwa upendo huo tumekuja hapa Makutano kudhihirisha kwa wenzetu wa Pokoti ya kwamba sisi hatuna shida, tunapenda amani.
The two warring communities have had historic raids that have led to several deaths. During the peace crusade, the women from the two communities were asked to promote dialogue and to share resources. One of the main causes of conflict in the region being the fight for these resources.
Mungu amebariki Turkana na majirani wake wa karibu. Na jirani wa karibu ni Pokot. Sisi tunataka vile tulo oil imeingia Turkana, sisi tukiweka magari yetu kukombolewa na Wapokot waingize yao.
Alternative ways of living like farming was encouraged. Previous meetings between the two communities have not been fruitful. Turkana South in particular has been worst hit by constant raids as the border constituency. The coming and sitting together of the women from the two communities a step closer, they say, to a peaceful village. Marcy Kandia, KTN, West Pokot County.
Now, we all know who would learn a very important lesson from that story, don't we?
About dialogue.
About dialogue. 1.77 trillion shillings, that's the amount that the government has budgeted to spend this year, and that is the budget. A pretty high amount. It is the highest in Kenya's history.
That's correct. And there's a deficit of about 342 billion shillings. Where's that going to come from? Well, on our Big Q, we're asking you whether you think that Kenyans should be taxed more to finance the 2014-2015 budget.
Absolutely, and you can get us on SMS 22155. That is the SMS line. You can tweet us at Kachungira at Wilson_Mburu, and we'll of course give you a poll result at the end of this live newscast. We'll also continue sampling some of your views as the bulletin continues.
That's right. I actually just want to read one tweet here from Thuo Kahiri. He's one of the few yeses we've seen. And he says, yes, because we need to avoid adding more debt to the nation. It's harming the shilling. Well, thank you for your feedback and keep that coming. Now, when we get back after this break, we're actually going to go to our business studio where Bonnie Tunya does have a panel. It's Monday, and that means Job Center is coming up. You might want to know, with this new budget and these impending financial events, how does the whole job market factor in? How can you get a job? Well, he has more on that, and we'll be coming to you, Bonnie, right after this break.
We are all working together with the LCCK as elders, and we want to form something which can help Kenya to come together. We as elders of Kenya, of various communities.
Good evening. It is Monday. You know it is time for the KTN Job Center, where we try to have objective conversations that are leading to solutions in regard to unemployment situations in this country. It's bigger, it's better, every Monday, such a time as this. Right, so they say desperate times call for desperate measures, and no one could have attested to this better than a middle-aged man who chained himself today at the monument of the former freedom fighter Dedan Kimathi. Now, the man who only identified himself as a grandson of the late Kimathi chained himself to the monument along Nairobi's Kimathi Street, demanding an audience with Nairobi Senator Mike Sonko. Now, the man said that life had been miserable ever since he graduated, and he has never secured employment. Take a look.
It is as if he's disturbed by his grandfather's spirit. I don't know, I can't tell, but anasubira hiyo kitu ya babu yake.
As far as we are concerned, there is no offense committed. That's why he has calmed down and we have decided to hand over the boy to the family. If there are any grievances, we shall know them later.
Well, too bad Mike Sonko was not in town. He was actually in Kisii. So, but then again, it's all about how you sell yourself. Now, in this job center segment, what we try to do is link a job seeker closer to an opportunity, but also ask ourselves, why are we not getting these jobs? Now, earlier on, I sat down with Robert Omondi. He's a young man who graduated from university in the year 2012 and no job yet. Take a look at this conversation.
My name is Omondi Robert Kosiba. I studied Bachelor of Commerce, Finance and Banking from Makerere University, and I graduated in 2012. I started tamarking immediately I graduated. That was the year 2012, up to now, which is 2014. So I have a vast experience of both what it entails to be on the to look for a job in the job market actually, and the challenges you get, like when you get a potential employer who promise you a job, but at the end of it, you find that you don't actually get this job he promised you. Yes. When I came to Nairobi, I had to stay with my uncle, who is a Jokali man, and he has a family of around 4 children and a wife. And we had to stay in a shanty in Dandora because that's the only relative I had in Nairobi whom I could go in. Like when I'm from home, that's the only person I could branch and start looking for a job through him. Now, it hasn't been that easy because when you stay with someone who earns, Jokali man is not someone who's certain of what he's going to earn because it depends with what he gets today, but tomorrow is not sure of. So it has been a very, very big challenge to me in that there are some things which I could not get from him. So I had to sacrifice myself. Like when you're going to look for a job, at least you need to print your CV. At least you need to look smart for the potential employer. To look and you say, this guy is really presentable and can really do this job. Now, when I was with him, actually, I found it quite challenging to him. So I decided to start looking for a way. I come up with a way of at least I can subsidize on top of the letter he gives. Okay, they called me for an interview. That was a CIC insurance company. Yeah, it was a temporary job of a credit assistant. I went there. They called me for an interview. I did the interview. Unfortunately, after doing the interview, up to now, I haven't heard from them. So I cannot tell whether actually I passed the interview or I failed. Yeah. So it's like it's a regret. They never like wanted to tell me like you failed the job. Yes. I'm someone who, with my communication skill, I believe that's one of the key things in a company. Like if you're able to express yourself in such a way that you can explain. Okay, if it's maybe a banking scenario, when a customer comes in, and you can explain to him actually what the banks offer, and the benefits going to get after joining the bank, that one requires that at least you must be 100%. Your communication skill must be high. Then on top of it, I'm someone who is of high integrity. I've never been engaged in any illegal deals, any wrongdoings. My records are very clean.
Right, and that has been the story of Robert Omondi, a story that just captures the lives of many others who are not documented. A lot of young people who've put out the effort to try and get the documentation and the qualification necessary to get a job, but they do not have a job. It's exactly just 3 or 4 days to the budget reading that is coming this Thursday. And the question we're asking, we've talked about the big number, 1.7 trillion. But is there a plan for people like Robert Omondi in this budget? And to help me understand that is Ladies first always. So Violet Wambua, she's the CEO of Networking in Hills. She'll tell us what exactly that is. But she's joined also by George Minor from PKF, who's a tax specialist there. And gentlemen and lady, you've seen such a story, and it breaks our hearts how someone would put a lot of effort to get that kind of documentation. But what do you make of that, Violet?
For me, that's a display of human misery.
Right.
And I think it goes on every day, every hour. And we've seen the point where you put out a notice that you just want a very, say, lowly skilled assistant, and the CVs that come pouring in are too...
Yeah, like he had a BCom finance and banking option.
Yes.
Well, he's
people
working at a
have gone to
carpentry
school.
shop. Yeah,
People have gone to school, and you see, it all comes from how we were brought up in a kind of education system. We were shown that you need white collar jobs. So anything that, you know, we over glorify the papers over actual experience, and an open mind to try out other sectors away from what we studied.
So it's a system that has been wired wrongly.
Yes, definitely.
George, let me bring you in on this. What are the sentiments you have when you watch such a story?
Actually, that's a desperate situation, which then calls for desperate measures from the government. And I think then we need to relook at our planning in terms of the youth and employment. Then ask ourselves, are we putting more emphasis on the papers, as it were, rather than the technical qualifications or on the job training, which is very, very important.
George, this Thursday we are having budget reading. Obviously, from your firm, you've done a lot of assessment, you've done a lot of calculations, and you have an opinion about this great budget. But is there room, is there space for people like Robert in this budget? And what space is this first?
Yeah, actually, if you look at the numbers that have just been released in terms of the budget estimates and the government policy paper for the prior financial year, the government had projected to create 1 million jobs. Out of the 1 million, as it stands, we're talking about 700,000 jobs that were created. Interestingly, and that's why I'm coming to that point, is that out of the 700,000, 94% have been created from the informal sector.
Yes.
That tells you something, that then we need to reprioritize in terms of planning for employment. In that, let the government put more emphasis on core sectors that are labor intensive, such as the construction sector, agriculture sector. And those are some of the areas where our viewer here would probably have a chance.
Right. Violet, you work with a lot of young women in your line of work, and every day I assume there are such cases, right? We're talking about this huge budget that no one knows from how we're going to fund it, well, other than Eurobond and taxes. But obviously there's a burden of where do we fit in all this? For the young women that you talk to, who obviously have the qualifications they need, but they do not have jobs, how do we marry such a budget with these people?
Well, thank God for Uwezo Fund, first of all. Thank God for the Women Fund. Thank God for the fact that now the mindsets are shifting. There's a paradigm shift from I gotta get an 8-to-5 job to how can I make money out of something that I love to do. So you find a lot of people I'm being encouraged, and actually I'm encouraging people to go into things they like to do. If you like to write, find a way to write. If you can submit to the standard and get money out of it, why not? Yeah, I'm sure you pay something small. Yes. So that's the kind of thinking that I'm encouraging. It's not too shabby, actually, because I've tried it myself. I'll be honest. So it's really just about telling people, yes, it's an amazing thing that you went to school, because school is to open your mind. It is not to set you on a railroad that you must
So
be
having
there.
graduated, you don't have a right to be entitled. Kenya owes you nothing. Is that what you're saying?
Kenya owes you the right to survive. And that's the one thing I shall keep on saying.
But no one owes you a job.
You know, Bonnie, you don't owe me a job, but you owe me the space to survive.
To express yourself,
To express myself, to dignity, because there's dignity in work, there's dignity in making a living, there's indignity of having to beg and borrow. Yes.
George, she's mentioned Uwezo Fund and all the other funds, Women Fund, and all these sort of funds that the government is setting, and looking not just in Kenya but across Africa. This has been the norm. Marginalization and trying to uplift people and give them a hand. How effective are they from the numbers you deal with?
Actually, that's a good question, because if you look at the 6 billion that was allocated, which was supposed to be for the rerun, allocated for the Uwezo Fund, the absorption capacity has not been as expected, because then we come up with all these good ideas. Ultimately, there's a lot of bureaucracy, such that the youth who is somewhere in Western Kenya or in Coast doesn't receive the funds, or it takes quite some time before the fund is actually received. Secondly, another issue we probably need to address is the awareness. Awareness in terms of the processes, the procedures to access the funds, especially for someone who is in the rural parts of Kenya.
So the money is there, but people just don't know. Now, George, you mentioned earlier a bit of the figures, and we'll have those figures on the screen right about now. Looking at what exactly has been done in the past year, and from the economic survey that was presented by the Ministry of Planning and Devolution, we talked about 700,000 jobs in both the informal and formal sector. But in the formal sector, we're just talking about 26,000 jobs. And that figure is worrying, because yes, the government targeted 1 million, we did 700, and it is not in the sectors that we thought. Yet the bulk of the people, as Violet has said, are thinking our jobs are in the offices. They're dropping CVs, they are buying or borrowing suits to show up for interviews, and they're not getting. How do we address this setup, Violet?
I feel we should encourage, rather government should encourage companies to go into wealth creation rather than just wealth acquisition. Because you see, graduates are rolling out like biscuits every single day, and there are so many universities right now. Like every college that was ever set up is now a university of sorts, and everybody's doing a flashy course, a marketable course, and we're running away from things that are actually sustainable over the years. So what I would say is that to keep this fantasy closer to the reality, encourage corporates to expand. I mean, government should partner with corporates so that then we create space for larger absorption. So then we're not talking about 26,000, we're looking at 2.6 million even, over a space of 10 years or so. So those are just, ways to, and also the NGO sector, just work with as many sectors as possible to create space. Because for me, the cry will be give everybody a right to survive.
George, what are the low-hanging fruits that we can leverage on this situation for the young people now?
I think firstly is to take advantage of the programs that the government has come up with, the various funds, because ultimately self-employment is one area where, when you talk about employment, is absorbing a huge number of the youth. Secondly, the government, particularly the cabinet secretary, even as he reads the budget on Thursday, one of the key areas I think the government should put emphasis is that come up with specific tax incentives that target companies which offer training and opportunities to fresh graduates. Because one of the biggest obstacles to fresh graduates is the lack of experience. I'm told our time is fast. Time flies when you're having fun, but
sorry, George. I think there's such a body, but there's no awareness about that.
Closing comments, less than 10 seconds.
Right to survive, right to survive, right to survive. Everybody has that right. So everything should be done to ensure that our youth and everybody has that right.
Judge?
I think the most important thing is change in attitude. It's important that those who are searching for employment to also look at some of these low-lying fruits and the opportunities that the government is offering in terms of the funds. And also look at the informal sector, like the construction sector, the real estate. That's where, if you look at that, you may end up finding your place.
Okay, great. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a good place to end this conversation, but every Monday we'll be having such conversations that are forward-looking, trying to look for solutions for the job situation in this country. And remember, if you're out there, you can reach us on our Twitter handle at KTN Job Center. Every Monday, same time, same place. This has been Job Center. Right, it's me again. This is business. Wheat farmers in Narok are counting losses following poor weather patterns in the area. Now, hundreds of acres of wheat are now turned into grazing fields, as now Kamche Menza reports.
At Lemeria Ole Salaoni's 230-acre farm in Ndurumeti, Tulele location, Narok County, this is all he has 3 months after planting. a first of its kind in his 10 years of wheat farming. Millions of shillings later and a bank loan. His crops have been weighed down by drought as the ground remains almost bare, contrary to the normal 3 months wheat plantation.
Sababu nimejaribu sana sharudia shamba mara mbili na kuwa hajafaulu.
On normal occasions, he says by now the plants will be over 24 inches high and ready for harvest in July and August.
Nilikuwa natarajia hata kama milioni 8 hivi.
Sadly though, Lemeria says that he is expecting totally nothing after investing a whole 3 million shillings into his farm. Just like Lemeria, a number of farmers here are counting losses. Most of them leased lands, investing millions of shillings, but the fields are now left for animals to graze.
Hakuna mashini kuingia hapa na hata hakuna kitu itafuna. Hii field ambayo unaiona hapa hivi ni eka 317 na yote hiko hivi.
Sasa hivi tumeweza kukadiria hasara kubwa. Nimevumilia kwa muda nikiona kama mvua itatokezea angalau ya kuimprove chakula. Kwa sasa hivi ninaweka mbuzi kwa sababu hakuna kitu natarajia.
Traditionally, these farmers would have been harvesting the wheat that's close to 4 months after planting, all knowing that they will repay the loans in time.
Kwa sasa hivi sijui kama watatufanyia nini sababu title ya shamba tujui kama atauza shamba yetu.
Kamchemenza, KTN at Ntulele location in Narok County.
Cane transportation was today disrupted at Mumia's sugar company for the better part of the day when enraged truck drivers went into a go-slow. Over the hanging fate of their jobs. Now, there are over 1,000 troubled drivers expressed apprehension following advertisements in the local dailies inviting bids for cane transporters services. Contracted drivers claimed that the move was ill-advised and that it will render most of them jobless. Elsewhere, while speaking in Nairobi, the board of directors of the company has terminated the services of employees involved in the 1.1 billion shilling sugar importation. The board says an audit conducted by KPMG shows the transaction was not in the best interest of the company. And finally, Kakuzi Limited, Uchumi Supermarket and Mumia's Sugar have been replaced by computing the Nairobi Securities Exchange 20-share index. The firms have been replaced by Britam, Centum Investment and CFC Holdings. The 20-share index is a key indicator of the market's performance. In a statement to media houses, the MSC says the review is aimed at ensuring the constituent counters reflect an accurate picture of the market performance in the country. Right, and it's at the NSC that you wind up this bulletin with a look at how your money is working for you on the Financial Market Review coming up next. Right, so that's how business looked like this Monday evening. My name is Boni Tunya. Nick Mudimba is up next with the sport.
3 days remaining to the biggest soccer extravaganza as teams start landing in Brazil.
There are people you give chances to express themselves. They cannot do it. But give them the chance to operate underneath here. Eh? Kanapita hujui kanapitia wapi. Ni kama fuko. Hata fuko ni ajabu inakausha nyasi.
It's time now for sports. I'm Nicholas Mudimba. The judo national team that will take part in the Commonwealth Games and All Africa Games was chosen in the competitive national judo championships at the GSU training school in Embakasi. Kenya Defence Forces team, GSU, GK Prison, Nakuru and Rongai teams all took part in the national event. The Kenyan contingent to the Commonwealth Games was chosen in the National Judo Championships at the GSU training school in Embakasi. The one-day event attracted 4 teams. The team comprising of both men and women went through a tedious selection process. A team that will represent the country also in the All Africa Games in Mozambique. The KDF team carried the day with 5 of its members making it to the national team. They bagged 36 points, followed by GSU who had 26, and Rongai came in third with 16 points.
Tough challenge. Their competitors are also preparing and maybe even preparing more harder, but we shall also be, after assembling, we shall be upping up our training so that we can match the standards required.
The training facilities has been a major problem for the team, but despite all the predicaments, the national team is willing to go to the end.
So far,
We have prepared our players well. We are going to go into residential training.
The team will go on a 3-week camp. The coaching staff will hand over the team to the National Olympics Committee before leaving for Glasgow on 23rd of July 2014. The Africa Games will go down on 25th of June in Mozambique.
Well, it's time to wrap up this bulletin, but I understand that we cannot give the poll result for our big question tonight. We did ask you whether you think whether the government should add tax Kenyans more to finance the 1.77 trillion shillings. We have had a lot of feedback. I believe that's why our system probably crashed. But we do have feedback on Twitter and on SMS, don't we, Nancy?
Yes, we do. I'll just read an SMS here from Grace in Nairobi. She says, well, yes, of course, budgets the world over financed by taxes. Whose budget is it? It's Kenya's budget and must obviously be provided for by Kenyans. What we can ask is, will the taxes be used to improve our lives? So it's a yes from her.
Mike Mwangi says the saddest thing about this is that most of this borrowed money is spent on recurrent expenditure. And the very last one here, Murithi says, no, if we're taxing Kenyans more, we should tax cockroaches as well.
I'm not sure how effective that would be.
That would work if you think about it.
You think so?
Yes.
Well, just one more here. This one says, I think we expect more from this Treasury. Sometimes I'm left confused about whether the individuals who sit at this ministry are competent. Their focus is more macroeconomic than it is micro and intermediate. It is this narrower focus that would shield the common mwananchi from the ever-rising cost of living occasioned by expansive budgets that they propose year in and year out. Well, thank you very much for your feedback. And if you want to see what people are saying, just look for the hashtag borrowing budget on Twitter. So many comments there. Thanks for joining us this evening. It was great to have you. Our sign language interpreter was William Silla, and I'm Nancy Katchingira.
My name is Wilson Buru. Enjoy the rest of your viewing. That conversation, as Nancy said, continues on Twitter. Have a good night.
Good night.